My name is Kelly Leonard. I am the Executive Vice President of Creative Strategy, Business Development, and Innovation at the Second City. I have the longest title at the Second City. That was always my goal. When I give my talks around the country around why people should care about improvisation, I talk about improvisation as being like yoga for your social skills, that it's sort of loud, noisy group mindfulness, that it's a practice in being unpracticed. And then I say, if that surprises you, it wouldn't if you knew the origin story of the Second City. So in the 20s and 30s, at Jane Addams Hull House on the south side of Chicago, there was this woman by the name of Viola Spolin who was a social worker, and her job was to better integrate immigrant children and neighborhood children who came into her care. So the way she did that was creating all these improv games, exercises games that the kids would play, and many of which were in gibberish or silence because the kids didn't always share the same language. But they would play these games and they would collaborate and communicate. And so it was really this sort of bridge of using art to form a civil society. And her son, Paul Sills, loved the games, and he taught them to his friends, people like Mike Nichols and Elaine May. And that group formed the first pure improvisational theater in modern America. This is in 1955. And that group was called the Compass Players. Essentially, that morphed into the Second City, which primarily used that improv to then create scripted scenes. And that opened in December 16th of 1959. So it came out of children's games. And we do teach kids today, but we also teach adults, and we teach corporate folks, and we do productions both here in Chicago and in Toronto and in Brooklyn, New York. And then we have touring productions that go all over the world. So it's really become sort of a vast exercise in improv-based comedy wherever we can find ourselves. The sort of script that we had when I worked in the box office, when people would call and say, "Hey, is Carrot Top performing tonight at the Second City?" would be like, "Well, we don't do stand-up. Have you seen Saturday Night Live? Have you seen Whose Line Is It Anyway?" We're kind of those two things. We utilize improvisation to create sketch comedy, and the shows, which are two-act revues, are often followed by a pure improv set. But the revues themselves are sketches and scenes and songs and some improv. Sometimes it's themed, sometimes it's not. But what it almost always is six amazing performer, writer, improvisers. And we're primarily known as the place that launches the career of so many people who end up on your television screens and on movie screens and now on your phones. So everyone from the early days, like Alan Arkin, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, to people like Peter Boyle and Joan Rivers and Robert Klein and Fred Willard, to people like John Candy and Gilda Radner and John Belushi and Bill Murray, to Chris Farley and Bonnie Hunt and George Wendt, to Stephen Colbert, Steve Carell, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler. I mean, it's just sort of endless. And then today you've got Tim Robinson and Sam Richardson, and it's just 65 years. We'll turn 65 on December 16th of this year in 2024. And it's still the place where people hone their comedic voice and their skills, and then we let them go and share that with the world. So Del Close was someone who was involved with the Second City fairly early as an actor. He was in the same cast with people like Avery Schreiber and Jack Burns and Joan Rivers. After Paul Sills left Second City, who was our original director, original artistic director, Sheldon Patinkin took over, and he was directing shows. And then Del started directing at Second City, and he had this very on again, off again relationship because Del Close was part of so many different counterculture movements. He found himself in LA working with groups like the Committee, but he also is rumored to have helped L. Ron Hubbard form form Scientology. I don't. It's always hard to know what's true and what's not with Del. He was, friends with the Beat Generation and people like Lenny Bruce. He's renowned for being the mentor teacher to people like John different times, got clean at different times. There's stories, and I know these are true as well, where he was locked in a psych ward, and the producers at Second City would go check him out so he could come direct the show at Second City, and then have to take him back to the hospital afterwards. Um, and then at a certain point, I think he just got tired of us, and maybe we got tired of him. And he ended up creating artistically, he was the artistic half of a team with Sharna Halpern to start a thing called Improv Olympic, which then got sued by the Olympics and had to change their name to IO. But it's one of the longest running homes of improvisation in Chicago, still exists to this day. And Dell believed the big schism at Second City. So Bernie Solins, one of our co-founders, really didn't think improv had much value beyond as a tool for creating sketch comedy. And Dell believed it was an art form in and of itself, like fireworks. That's the kind of thing he thought it was. And they always had this argument going back and forth. And I was lucky, blessed. I don't know. Dell was dying of lung cancer, I believe. And he had a living wake at his hospital room. Bill Murray was there, Harold Ramis was there, there was a pagan priest, there was a jazz saxophone player, and Bernie was there. And I remember I was just behind next to the bed where Dell was, and Bernie went up to him and said, I think Dell actually said, improv is an art form, and Bernie said, it is tonight, Dell. It absolutely is tonight. And then Dell was starting to choke, and Bernie had been stepping on his air hose. So this is a moment in time I'll never forget. Dell didn't die that night. He died the next day, I believe. But it was one of these legendary sort of moments that people talk about. And so many of these folks aren't with us anymore. But yeah, Dell was a singular voice in the Chicago comedy scene, both at Second City, but then instrumental in building these other institutions that have only served to make us all better and stronger and more interesting, I think. So Saturday Night Live, which premiered in 1975, as many people know, that first cast included a few Second City alumni, John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, and Gilda Radner. And the following year, Bill Murray joined the cast, so then there were four. There was great concern that suddenly SNL would take all of our talent all the time. And generally somewhat true that happened. A lot of our people have gone on to Saturday Night Live. I forget it last. I mean, between writers and performers, it's well over 60, 70 individuals. But the SNL relationship at a certain point, I remember um, when I first started producing here in 1992, there was a real idea of like, look, this is they help us. People see, Tina Fey going to SNL, and they recognize that she started at Second City, or Rachel Dratch or Amy Poehler, and they want to come here and they want to take that path. So we're on much more friendly terms, and have been for at least a few decades now, so that they come and scout at the Chicago location pretty much every year. They probably come in a couple times, sometimes 3 times a year. When they're looking for people, they'll fly folks out to audition. And it's a really cordial, good relationship. And I think for so many of us who are, aging at our jobs, and Lorne Michaels is not the young producer he was when he started that thing in 1975. There's sort of a romance to the relationship. And I remember a few years ago, I was coming up, they were in the building, and I was coming in, and Lorne was just standing outside in front of the arches and the Second City banner. And he says, will you take a picture of me in front of the banner? And I'm like, yeah. And so he gave me his phone, and I did a little picture for him. And it was just a nice little moment. And it was something that he wanted to have, and it was great. So no, we feel good about SNL, and it's kind of amazing. I mean, I think people don't understand how young their demographic is. From what I've seen, their average audience member is 13 years old. So I think for those people who, want to bemoan that SNL is no good anymore, it's like SNL has always been what SNL is. And when you were 13, you loved it. And when people are 13 now, they love it. And you might be 46 now. And it's just a different relationship that you got with that show. So yeah, they're good. So yeah, I'm really lucky My first cast at the Second City in 1992 included Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert, and Amy Sedaris, just to start with. Um, I mean, the Colbert thing is different because he was my wife's roommate at Northwestern. For Colbert, again, he's a friend, wickedly smart, wickedly talented. Steve Carell, at the same time, was someone who it was much harder to pinpoint his genius because so much of what Carell is good at is a slow burn, playing without the ball, setting up others, and he's a tremendous actor. Uh, he was at Second City a long time before he moved, maybe like 8 years or so, which is unusual to be here that long. And it took him. I mean, he's so famous now and does so many different things, but it's like that took a while for everyone to figure out how great he was. Tina Fey was someone who was in maybe the very first class that we auditioned when I became producer at Second City. And it was just clear, again, like Colbert, she has such a tremendous wit and knowledge, and her ability to frame that both as a writer and an improviser is phenomenal. There's lots of really talented, brilliant people here, and there are some people who just are singularly unique. And I'd say Tina and Amy Poehler were two of those. Amy Poehler more obviously. I remember Amy had her bike stolen, or part of her bike. I think she was left with her bike tire when she was doing her level 5 show, her grad show in the training center, and she wrote and sang a song about it. And literally, my wife Ann, who was teaching at the time, was like, "You've got to see this," and like pulled me in just to see this number. I'm like, "This is brilliant, so obvious." Tina was not obviously a star. Amy, cute and blonde and bubbly and like, and Tina was a writer brain and a little, otter and all that. And but both of them, and they were best friends, were just so clearly operating at another level. And the blessing about like hiring at Second City is that it's never one person. Like there's never one person here who hired any of these folks. It's a group of us in a room generally agreeing, well, like never not agreeing on a Tina Fey or a Stephen Colbert or an Amy Poehler or an Adam McKay. Never not agree. We all did. Everyone's like, obvious, good, they're in. And then we would disagree about people, and generally speaking, those people either made it or didn't, but aren't the people who everyone talks about as the superstars. The superstars are clearly superstars. We all get it. It's almost impossible not to notice this. The one funny story that Andrew Alexander, who owned Second City for many years, sold it not too long ago, tells is that he was producing SCTV and he had seen this young African-American stand-up who he really wanted to put in the cast. And this kid was ready to do it. He was only like 19 years old. And he came to Second City and did improv sets. And the cast ultimately voted not to allow Andrew to cast Eddie Murphy in the cast of SCTV. So he went to SNL. I have theories about why Chicago, um, for art in general. All right, here's some of my theories. One is the weather is so bad that it's impossible to be happy all the time because it's so gray and cold and terrible. Our politics are terrible. Our sports teams often suck. And to try to find some level of happiness, we have to generate it ourselves because the conditions are so terrible. And thus art happens. Art doesn't come out of comfort. Great art comes out of discomfort. And it is not comfortable living in Chicago for a lot of the time. I have another theory, which is it's not New York and LA. New York and LA have professionalized the art scenes. So while there is, anti-art and there are storefronts and other stuff, truly in Chicago, and this is going to become less true. It's even less true now. It's going to become less true as we move forward. But for the bulk of the time that Second City's been around, that when you're in Chicago, you aren't like focused on your agent or your manager and the next thing. You're doing the thing that you're doing, and you're highly, highly focused on that. And so much great art that comes out of Chicago is unownable. So think about it. No one can own improvisation. No one can own the blues. No one can own house music. No one can own spoken word. These are all art forms that really developed in Chicago and sent forth to the world. And I think the amount of creativity that individuals can allow themselves to possess that won't be exploited unduly, that won't be altered by greed, that won't be corrupted by money, is because it's unownable. Now, Second City pays its talent to own its scripts, but the improv stuff, and really that is the stuff that is that every performer here takes with them. The idea that one scene or one character is going to make you or break you is a bad way of thinking, because that's just not what great artists, how they approach their work. But their process and their ability to work with other people. So I just think Chicago has been uniquely situated because of its, middle of the country, not on a coast. I mean, again, the weather. There's a reason that great, certain music came out of Detroit. It's a very, very similar situation. Toronto as well. I mean, like it's that whole middle belt, right? If you go up in North America. So yeah, the environment, but also the artistry that comes out of not attaching a dollar sign to every single thing you do, so you have time to gestate and create, and then eventually do make money. I mean, because like everyone's got to live, and everyone should live. But the road to being a great artist again is not one that is comfortable with a full-time check at day one. If it were comfortable with a full-time check at day one, I don't think you get the great art. So a lot of people actually don't understand how Second City creates a show. So we have two acts. So a final Second City show that we open with a funny title, hopefully, is a two-act show containing a series of scenes, songs. Some of the scenes are 30 seconds. Some of them could be 12 minutes. We most nights do a third act that is improvised. The Second City process for creating a show is genius. It is from 1959 to today. When we follow the process, it always works. The only time it has not worked is when someone has done something different than this process that I'm about to tell you. So I'm giving you the keys for anyone if they want to take it from us. So we generally, over about a 10 to 12 week process, create a review in front of an audience. So what does that mean? That means we have a director, we have 6 actors, a musical director, a stage manager, and there are producers around and other folk. But primarily that unit is coming in during the day, not every day, but most days, to rehearse. But then in the evening, when they're doing their 2-act review and their improv set, they're using the improv set to try out their material in front of the audience. If a scene hits, and by that I mean it gets its laughs, we will then toss it the next night into the regular show, kick out an old scene, put a new scene in, and see how it works there. And if it works great, it stays. If it doesn't, we either move it back to the improv set or we throw it away. And we just gradually do that. We gradually throw out old material, put in new material, mix things around. The first 4 weeks is pure yes and. So this is an improv concept. The reason it was the name of my book is it's very powerful and very sticky. And the idea is that human beings' default behavior is often to say no or do nothing. And yes and is a nudge, to use a term from Richard Thaler, the Nobel Prize winning economist, a nudge to not, a nudge to allow for new ideas to exist and be added to. So this first 4 week of the process is hugely important because we need to get to an abundance of ideas. There's a scientist at Stanford, Bob Sutton, who his research shows we need about 2,000 ideas to get to a good idea. People are often like surprised or scared by that idea. Don't be. We walk around, human beings walk around, and neuroscience tells us this, with about 60,000 ideas a day. About 30,000 of those are novel every single day. And so yes and not only allows you to present your idea, but it has your idea elaborated on by anyone in the cast who wants to play with that. So you end up with all this content. Some of it's going to be great. Some of it won't be. That's fine. We need a lot. And sometimes you mix and match. One of the favorite stories I talk about is Mick Napier, who's sort of a legendary educator and director in Chicago, founder of the Annoyance Theater, and has worked for Second City forever, and was on my previous call right before we jumped on this Zoom. Mick recognized that even when he was directing a Second City main stage cast, which in theory are the best improvisers in the world, who shouldn't be in any way in their fear brain or their shame brain, shouldn't be judging themselves or judging others, will default to that at some point during the process. So he instituted a thing called Taboo Day. And during Taboo Day, you were required to come in with 3 ideas for either sketches or improvs or songs that there's no way in hell Second City would ever allow on their stage. They're too offensive, they're too hard, they're too expensive, whatever. Inevitably, half of those ideas ended up in the show because we self-censor. We all do it. We're like, that's a stupid idea. Here, part of the process is give me your stupid idea and give me another stupid idea. And I want another stupid idea. And it's very freeing, both as a human being and as an artist. So that first 4 weeks is yes and then what do? We are constantly revising and playing with the material in front of an audience, getting instantaneous feedback. So it's an instantaneous feedback loop. And then by the final couple weeks, we are just fine-tuning, honing, editing, sharpening everything. And then by the time we open our show to our critics, we know at the very least that Second City show will be funny because we have tested it in front of hundreds of audiences. And we know it's funny. Is it art? Maybe, maybe not. Hopefully it is, but at the very least, it is going to be entertaining and funny. And I'll say this because this is true and highly unusual. We are the only entertainment institution that I can think of, or that anyone could tell, please challenge me on this, that has been as commercially successful as we have, only doing original work. There's no, like, we have touring companies that do best of Second City shows, but the resident stages, there's no best of. So there is no playing the hits. The hits are being made every year, and we sell out most of our shows. I don't know any entity that does that. Here's the greatest lesson, and this is just right now today, which is I'm an idiot and it's okay. And what I mean by that is, you know, it is true of every human being that we want to do well. We want people to think well of us. We want to be smart. We want to be successful, all those things. And we do get it wrong most of the time. Everyone does. It is a complete, if someone is sort of acting like they always get it right, please run away from them because they're either a sociopath or a psychopath. We all have imposter syndrome. We all Google ourselves on occasion. We all have doubt. That's okay. And in fact, the quirky stuff, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, that's where all the comedy comes from. That is what ties us together as human beings. What connects us is just as much that we need each other, which we certainly do, but that we're all fallible. And in that, this idea at Second City that all of us are better than one of us is because of that. So if I'm improvising and I know your job is to save me and you know my job is to save you, we're going to be just fine. Because that is the bottom layer. That is the fundamental understanding of anyone going on a stage. If you break that covenant, that's a problem. But when you don't, and the majority of the time you don't, that's magic. You know, it's crucial. So it's not just about creating really funny shows. It's not just about developing really funny people. It's about making better humans. And that is a thing. It took me a long while to learn that. That's certainly not the first part of my career. But it's definitely the second part of my career, and I think it's invaluable. So I think a lot about right now what this next generation of performers is going to be like. I'm married to a college professor, tenured professor of comedy, and it's really hard right now at the schools. A lot of young people are hurting for very valid reasons with regard to not just COVID and George Floyd and all the things that we've dealt with over the last few years, but really waking up to the fact that the system works against people. It is very set up for a lot of white men who have a lot of money. It is still rife with misogyny and racism, systemically, institutionally, and at other sort of individual levels. It favors the wealthy. There's no social safety net, all those things. So I get how hard it is. I think that young people would greatly benefit from Second City training, in the sense that it provides you with the skills of being agile. It provides you with the ability to do what people call future thinking, because you're not working from a script. You are making your script in real time, and you are evolving that script with the next day, the next evening performance, the performance after that. Nothing is static, and nothing is static in the world. And I think it's just easier to be scripted. We think it's easier to be scripted. And it is for people who have wealth, generational wealth, and who are straight and white and male, and all those things. But that's not sustainable. And we all need each other. So the ability to work inside an ensemble, and tend to your own needs while you tend to the needs of your fellow ensemble players, and recognize that the group comes first, but the group also, their job is to also hold you and protect you and keep you safe. All those things are impossibly important. And I'll say this too, which is there's a way of setting a boundary and also allowing yourself for real positive discomfort. And that's the thing is, in improvisation, if you're working from a place where you're always comfortable, you're doing it wrong. And discomfort gets a bad take. And I understand why, because certain people have used it in bad ways. My friend Nir Ayel says that if it can't be used for evil, it's not a superpower. So I get that there are people who can use the things that Second City does for bad purposes, but that's true of everything in the world. So you don't throw all that out. At the same time, Second City has had to adapt and figure out, okay, what are things that we did in the past that are wrong, and how do we do better? And what are fun, when COVID happened, I think everyone who's worked in theater forever had to interrogate the idea of the show must go on. Because at a certain point, it's like, no, the show mustn't go on because people are sick and they're dying. And that is more important than putting on our comedy show. But we do want to put on our comedy show. So can we do this in both ways? Can we make people safe to put on our comedy show? The audience, the actors, everyone. And we found a way to do it. And then, vaccines came, and people should be taking them because they actually work. And that made it safer for us to take off the masks and do the shows in the way that we want to do them. And you can just see from the day we reopened to right now, a world of difference. Because right after we reopened, it was scary for audiences and for the cast. And this work doesn't work well when you're working out of fear. So I would say to sort of future generations, like, there's such powerful lessons to be learned in this art form. And it continues to evolve. And it is because it's so rooted in things that we understand from the past, but it's always looking forward. It's always about what's next, who's next, what else can we do. So it's kind of the best of both worlds.